There is a tunnel under the sea between two Japanese islands. It runs for 54 kilometers. 23 of those kilometers pass beneath open ocean, and at its lowest point, it sits 240 meters below the surface of the water and 100 meters below the seabed itself. It took 42 years to build. It cost 12 times its original budget. It killed 34 men. Most people on Earth have never heard of it. And right now, as you are watching this, pumps are running inside that tunnel. They have been running continuously since 1988. They have never been switched off, not for a single hour, because the sea is still trying to get in. On the night of September 26, 1954, a typhoon named Marie tore across the Tsugaru Strait, the violent stretch of water that separates the Japanese mainland of Honshu from the northern island of Hokkaido. The ferry Toya Maru was crossing with more than 1,100 people aboard. She never reached the other side. 4 other ferries went down in the same storm. When the water settled, Japan had suffered the worst maritime disaster in its modern history, and the country made a decision that would take 4 decades to keep. If the strait could not be crossed safely on the water, it would be crossed underneath it. This is the story of the Seikan Tunnel. Stay with me to the end, because the twist in this story is not the flood, and it is not the deaths. It is what happened after they finished. Before we go down, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from right now. We want to see how far this tunnel reaches. To understand why this project consumed 42 years of Japanese engineering, you have to understand what sits above the tunnel roof. 240 meters of cold black water. The pressure on that roof is measured in tons per square meter, and it never lets up, not for a second, not for a century. And the material holding that pressure back is the worst rock a tunnel engineer can be handed. The Tsugaru Strait sits on a volcanic seam. The stone beneath it is not the clean, predictable granite that tunnelers pray for. It is fractured andesite and shattered volcanic tuff, cut through by 9 separate fault zones. It crumbles under a gloved hand. It holds water like a sponge, and every crack running through it connects eventually to the Pacific Ocean. That created a margin that was brutal and completely binary. Drift the alignment into a fault zone and seawater comes through the face in a wall. Drift too deep to avoid the faults and the pressure crushes the profile before you can line it with concrete. There was no safe corridor through the strait. There was only a corridor that was slightly less lethal than every alternative. So the surveying began in 1946, 1 year after the war ended, in a country that had almost nothing left. Engineers lowered instruments into the strait. They detonated small explosive charges and listened to the echoes bounce back off the rock formations below. They mapped the seabed by sound, blindly, year after year. It took them roughly 20 years just to decide where the tunnel could go. Digging began in the 1960s. Work on the main tunnel started in 1971, and almost immediately, the machines failed. A tunnel boring machine is a beautiful piece of engineering. A rotating steel face weighing hundreds of tons, grinding forward through the earth in a straight, continuous mechanical line. It is also, in bad ground, completely useless. A boring machine needs the rock to hold its own shape around the shield while the cutter head works. Feed it fractured volcanic rock saturated with seawater, and the face collapses inward into the cutting wheel. The machine jams. The tunnel eats itself. So Japan went backwards. They abandoned the modern machines and reverted to the oldest method in the history of tunneling. Drill, blast, muck out, support, repeat. Watch what that actually looked like 200 meters below the ocean. A crew stands at a wall of wet black rock. Jumbo drills bite into the face, boring dozens of holes in a precise geometric pattern, water and rock dust spraying back over the men in the lamplight. The holes are packed with explosive charges. Everyone retreats down the gallery. The charge fires in a sequence timed to the millisecond, so that the rock fragments cleanly instead of shattering into unmanageable slabs. The dust settles. The muck is cleared. Steel arches and shotcrete go up to hold the roof. And the tunnel has advanced by roughly 1 meter. Then they do it again, and again, 54,000 times. But before any of that, they did something that almost nobody outside Japan understands. They drilled ahead of themselves. A slim horizontal probe was punched forward from the tunnel face, sometimes reaching as far as 2 kilometers into the rock in front of the crews. It brought back a core sample. It brought back water. It told them exactly what was waiting on the other side of the wall they were about to blow open. They were reading the mountain like a book, 1 page ahead of the page they were standing on. And when the probe came back wet, everything changed. Wet meant a fault, and a fault at that depth meant death. So they injected the rock, cement slurry and sodium silicate, pumped under enormous pressure into every crack and fissure ahead of the face, hardening inside the stone into a shell. They were no longer tunneling through rock. They were manufacturing it, turning a sponge into a wall, 1 meter at a time, before daring to break it open. It worked, most of the time. In May of 1976, the pilot tunnel was pushing forward under open ocean. The probe drilling missed something. The face opened into a fault zone that nobody had mapped, and the Pacific came in. 80 tons of seawater per minute. Not a leak, not a seep, not a trickle down the wall. A river, firing horizontally out of solid rock, driven by the weight of 240 meters of ocean stacked above it. The men ran. The water chased them down the gallery, filling the pilot tunnel and pouring back into the working sections behind it. Pumps that had been sized for seepage were meaningless against a torrent that size. Within hours, kilometers of tunnel that had taken years to excavate were underwater. It took them 2 months to get it back. 2 months of pumping. 2 months of divers going into flooded galleries in total darkness. 2 months of injecting grout into a hole that was actively firing seawater back at them under pressure. 2 months of brutal, dangerous, unglamorous work simply to return to a point they had already reached once before. And they did not stop. That is the part of this story I cannot get past. They lost 2 months. They nearly lost the entire project, and the next morning the drills started again. Let me ask you something, and I want an honest answer in the comments. Knowing the sea had already come in once, knowing it could come in again at any meter, at any hour, with no warning, would you have gone back down that shaft the next morning? Because roughly 3,000 men did, every single day, for years. They kept digging, and as they dug, they built something inside that tunnel that had never been built anywhere on Earth before. 2 railway stations, underneath the ocean. Tapi Kaite and Yoshioka Kaite, platforms carved out of solid rock beneath the seabed, connected to the surface far above by vertical shafts and lifts. Nobody lives there. Nobody could. They were not built for passengers or for commerce. They were built for one reason only. If a train catches fire in the middle of the strait, the people on board need somewhere to go. Think carefully about what that means. Somebody sat in an office and calculated the survivable distance. They worked out how far a burning train could realistically travel before it stopped. They worked out how far a human being could run through smoke in a confined tube before collapsing. And then they carved a refuge into the rock at exactly that interval. Those stations exist because someone accepted in advance, on paper, that the worst thing might happen. They also cut 3 tunnels, not 1. A pilot tunnel to explore the rock ahead and to drain the water. A service tunnel for access, ventilation, and emergency evacuation. And the main tunnel, the one that carries the trains. The pilot tunnel is still down there today, still working, still carrying away the water that never stops seeping through the volcanic rock. The tunnel you would ride through is the only one you would ever see, but it survives because of 2 other tunnels that no passenger will ever set foot in. Now the hardest part of the entire project. 2 crews digging from opposite islands through 9 fault zones under 23 kilometers of moving ocean for more than a decade. Both of them effectively blind. Both of them working from surveys, gyroscopes, and calculations made before most of the equipment they were using even existed. They had to meet. And there is no fixing this if you get it wrong. You cannot go back and re-dig 50 kilometers of tunnel. If the 2 headings pass each other in the rock, if they miss by 10 meters in a dimension nobody can see, then the most expensive civil engineering project in Japanese history becomes a 50-kilometer hole in the ground that connects nothing to nothing. On January 27, 1985, the pilot tunnels broke through. After years of tunneling from opposite ends of a strait toward a point that neither crew could see, hear, or verify, the final alignment error was measured in centimeters. 2 crews, 2 islands, 240 meters below the sea. They walked toward each other through solid volcanic rock for over a decade, and they met almost exactly where the mathematics said they would. On March 10, 1985, the main tunnel broke through. Men from Honshu and men from Hokkaido shook hands underneath the Tsugaru Strait, in a place where, 31 years earlier, more than 1,100 people had drowned in a storm. The final cost was 538 billion yen, roughly 12 times the original estimate. 42 years passed between the first survey and the first train, and 34 men died building it. 34. That number is not a statistic, and it should not be read like one. 34 men went down a shaft in the morning and did not come back up in the evening. Most of them died in rockfalls and in water. They are the reason the pumps run without stopping. They are the reason the refuge stations exist. Every single safety system inside the Seikan Tunnel is written in somebody's name. On March 13, 1988, the tunnel opened. The longest tunnel in the world. The deepest railway tunnel ever constructed. The longest undersea passage that human beings had ever cut through the crust of the earth. And this is where the story turns. By 1988, the world that the tunnel had been built for had quietly stopped existing. When the Toya Maru went down in 1954, flying between Honshu and Hokkaido was expensive and rare. Crossing the strait meant taking the ferry, and taking the ferry meant accepting risk. That was the world the tunnel was designed to fix. But by the time it finally opened, 34 years later, the sky above Japan was full of cheap, fast, frequent airplanes. The tunnel was slower than flying. It was more expensive to operate than anyone had projected. And a flight from Tokyo to Hokkaido took a fraction of the time. Passenger numbers came in far below the forecasts. Japanese critics gave it a nickname that stuck for years. They called it the Tunnel to Nowhere. 42 years of work, 12 times over budget, 34 men dead. And the problem it was built to solve had solved itself somewhere else, in the sky, while they were still underground. But the story does not end there, because the tunnel did something that nobody put in the projections. It survived. It sat under 240 meters of ocean for decades, through earthquakes, through typhoons, through the constant, patient, relentless pressure of a sea looking for the one crack the engineers had missed. The pumps ran. The grout held. The volcanic rock stayed exactly where those men had told it to stay. And in 2016, 28 years after it opened and 62 years after that ferry went down, the Hokkaido Shinkansen ran through it. The bullet train, underneath the ocean, through a tunnel that had been publicly written off as a monument to national waste. Although even that comes with an engineering catch that almost nobody knows about, and it is the most Japanese detail in this entire story. The Seikan Tunnel carries freight trains as well as bullet trains, because the freight line to Hokkaido runs through it. And when a Shinkansen passes a freight train inside a confined tube at high speed, the column of air trapped between them is compressed into a pressure wave violent enough to physically shove the freight cars sideways on the rails. So the fastest train in the world, running through the deepest undersea tunnel in the world, has to slow down. It reduces to a fraction of its top speed for the entire crossing. The Seikan Tunnel is the one place on the Japanese network where the bullet train is required to hold itself back. They built the impossible, and then they had to ask it to be patient. So what is it in the end? A monument to human stubbornness? A memorial to 1,100 people who drowned in a storm on a September night. An enormous hole in the ground that arrived late to its own purpose and had to wait decades to be understood. It is all of those things at once, but go down there today and the pumps are still running. The water is still coming through the volcanic rock, exactly as it did in 1976, and machines are still pushing it back out into the sea, every minute of every hour of every day, unseen and unthanked. 240 meters below the Tsugaru Strait, a country is still holding back the ocean 70 years after it decided that it would. Every megastructure we take apart starts with a single question. What should we decode next? That answer is yours. Put it in the comments, and the next deep dive might be the one you asked for. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. The next structure goes even deeper. We will see you down there.